Hello everyone, hope you're all doing well, and I hope this video finds you all happy and healthy. And unfortunately, some of you must think that when I say hope and healthy and happy, you must think I'm dishonest. Let me try to explain. So, for quite some time now, I've been talking about reason versus emotion on this channel. And once in a while, I'll get this comment that presupposes that I somehow don't value emotion, or that I think there's no room for emotion when it comes to people. And that's completely asinine, and that's a complete misrepresentation of my position. Because whenever I talk about reason versus emotion, it's always done in the context of logic, right? It's a dichotomy in a very specific context. So when I say reason versus emotion, what I'm really talking about in the context of logic, what I'm really talking about is logic versus pseudo-logic, or the lack of logic, or flawed logic. I really hope that makes sense. But of course, I like and I respect emotion. I myself feel, and I'm upset. And since I've been talking about veganism, let's keep it in that vein and tell you why I'm upset, why I feel, or what I feel. I feel for young, impressionable kids who are going to go vegan and ruin their health. But it's not because of empathy or living vicariously through some little kids. It's of my, I believe, innate desire to preserve our species. Speciesism. We'll get back to empathy in just a second, but in that same vein of people criticizing me for not recognizing the value of emotion and being completely wrong, someone had made a video, someone I'm subscribed to, where she was talking about how we're too preoccupied with logic, that it's sometimes okay to make decisions based in emotion solely. Now, if you're talking about making decisions for yourself that don't affect anybody else, then I agree. You can do whatever you want. You can make emotionally based decisions, right? But the problem with veganism, and this person was a vegan talking about this in this context, I don't mean to be, misrepresenting what they said, but it just made me think what she said. Since she is talking about veganism and not eating animals, and saying that it's okay to make decisions that affect other people based on how she feels or how a vegan might feel, I completely reject that, because I don't think you can have emotion without reason, without logic. First comes logic, and then comes emotion. Always. But you could prove me wrong, if you think I am, by giving me an example of an emotion that arose that had nothing to do with logic, or at the very, very least, some kind of logical calculus, right? I'm not saying, when I say logic, I'm not saying that it's perfect logic. It could be pseudo logic. That person may not have all the information available on which they made their decision, right? So it's a flawed conclusion. They have an emotional reaction to, not having all the factors available in front of them, or they're using flawed logic, right? But they're using some kind of rationalization to inform their emotions. What I'm saying is that you can't have emotion without logic, however flawed, first. That's what I'm saying. And I'll get back to that in a second. But kind of in that same vein, I want to talk about empathy. Because it's a type of emotion based in pseudo-logic. But there is that logical underpinning there, right? There are reasons for why we feel empathy, if indeed you think that is what you're feeling. And I think a lot of people don't understand empathy or what that exactly means. So what is empathy? Well, in ancient Greek, is in, pathy comes from the word pathos, which is feeling, suffering, disease, or the root word in the word pathology, the study of disease, right? See, ancient Greeks recognized, at least on some level, that empathy was a disease. You were making yourself sick. You were making yourself suffer. You were making yourself feel. It's pathological. Empathy is pathological. I mean, after all, can you really put yourself in someone else's shoes? It's like a lot of black Americans who say they feel the pain of their ancestors, and they're literally on video saying this, crying and getting very emotional, right? These are mentally ill people. Why? Well, because you can't feel the emotions of someone else or how somebody else felt. It's physically impossible. It's a mental illness. Think about it like this. Someone who has split personality disorder, right? They think that they're two people at the same time. That's a mental illness. Somebody who has all the money in the world, loving family, friends, they could buy anything they want. They could go anywhere they want to go. They have emotional support all around them. And yet, they're chronically depressed, right? It's a completely irrational feeling. Why would you feel sad all the time when you could have anything that any person could possibly want? Right? It's a mental illness because it's this irrational feeling. When people hallucinate and see things all the time that aren't there, those are irrational feelings, right? They're mentally ill. When you truly empathize, and I know we use this word colloquially without really understanding what it means, like the Greeks understood it. When you say that you feel empathy for something, you're literally living vicariously through them. You're putting yourself in their shoes. Now, it's difficult enough to try to understand how a person could truly empathize with another person when it's physically impossible to feel what they feel. It's yet another level of mental illness to empathize with animals. And that's exactly what vegans do, or they claim that that's what they do. I think a lot of vegans are just misled, misguided. They don't really understand what empathy is. But I do believe there are some vegans who are truly mentally ill, and they actually think that they feel the pain that some of these animals feel, or they try their best to try to feel what those animals feel. Those are mentally ill vegans. I mean, you tell me what's more mentally ill than an apex predator refusing to hunt or at the very least slaughter animals it raised for food. It's like observing a lion in the wild eating grass because it empathizes with the antelope. Mentally ill. No debate there. But see, this is the problem with humanity. We've been mentally ill for quite some time. And I think it's probably related to our diet. I mean, look at this sick society we live in. Some of the shit that people engage in. Some of the things that people do to one another, right? We're mentally ill. There's no doubt about that. Some of us for sure. And as far as that being related to diet, if you don't know anything about Jordan Peterson's story, or the story of his daughter and how they battled depression and how they fixed it with their diet, I suggest you look into that. What did they take out of what was one of the main culprits in their diet? Grain, right? The golden child of agriculture, the diet that they put us on roughly 10, 12,000 years ago. You could also listen to Dr. Natasha Campbell's lectures on her clinical practice and how she's been able to cure autism and depression and mental illness with diet. Okay, so I believe there's a connection there. But going back to empathy, what a lot of people confuse for empathy is social contract. The reason why we don't go around murdering other people is not because we can somehow put ourselves in their shoes and feel what they could feel if someone were to kill them, maybe us. That's not why we don't murder people. We don't murder people because we recognize that to have a society where people just go around murdering one another, well, it's going to come and bite us in the ass, literally, right? That's why we don't murder. Social contract, not empathy. And if you think empathy is so important and we should base at least some of our decisions when it comes to social policy or telling other people what diet they should be on, if you think feelings should inform those decisions and that reason has nothing to do with it sometimes, you tell me why we never empathize with the serial killer that's about to be executed. Why don't we? I mean, he's about to die. He's about to be killed. Why don't we empathize with him? Oh, that's right, because they're a bad person. But there's the rub. Didn't you just try to rationalize why you feel, why you have certain feelings, or maybe their lack thereof? And if you're starting to rationalize your feelings, aren't you saying that the underpinning of feelings is indeed logic? When a minute ago you were saying they're supposed to be separate. At least when it comes to killing living beings. Or when is it, you tell me, when is it okay to inform our decisions that impact other people, obviously, based in emotion? And when is it okay to use logic if you still think that they're separate? And I'll prove to you that they're not. When is it okay? In what context? Well, in the context of us not eating animals because they suffer, right? Because I feel they're suffering somehow. I don't know how you could, but it makes you feel a certain way to see them suffer. And that's why you believe people shouldn't do that. You have these certain feelings that you think should inform social policy. But I could turn around and say, look, your vegan fare, growing and harvesting of your vegan fare, kills tons of animals. The combine harvester mashes a whole bunch of animals in it. Pesticides kill a whole bunch of animals. They even engineer and release viruses that blind and slowly kill millions of rabbits. Now I could say, I feel it's not okay to kill innocent wildlife because that's more valuable than animals that we produce. Thus, we need to pass policy and laws that will prevent you from eating grain or kale or any of these other things, any of this vegan fare, because invariably and inevitably the production of these foods is going to result in animals dying. Right? That's how I feel. Now, why should I listen to your feelings? Why should your feelings inform social policy and not my feelings? Well, in order to justify that, we're going to have a little spitting contest, not anything I would really engage in, but for the sake of the argument, you're going to start pulling out numbers out your ass, talking about how many trillions of animals die in a slaughterhouse, and I'm going to cherry pick numbers to say how many animals die in the fields, right? And we're going to try to do what? Rationalize and use logic to back our feelings. If you're saying that you feel we shouldn't kill and eat animals because they suffer, 99% of this world says, we're going to use animals. I feel we need to use animals for food. That's what they feel. Why should your feelings trump their feelings? If feelings, as you say, should inform our decision in this case, Maybe not all cases, but definitely in this case. Why? Well, once again, to justify your feelings, you're going to have to use logic. And I would love to hear this logic, how the 1% deserves, based on their fees, to tell what the 99% should be doing, even though they feel otherwise. I would love to hear this logic, but let me not get too excited. I'd like to see an instance, someone present me with an instance where a decision was informed by emotion and not logic at all. Because some people seem to think that you can do that. I would like you to show me how. Because look, if I punch you, you feel, right? Me punching you is the result of laws of physics and chemistry and, I don't know, gravity, whatever. Aerodynamics, so on and so forth. And you feeling is the result of the same laws, right? So even though that's not the type of logic that happens in our brain, it's still laws of logic, logical laws of the universe that make you feel. And I know this is on a very physical level, but it's just one example of how you can't feel without logic first. Now, I saw a video the other day of a grandfather jumping into the bay to save his granddaughter being drowned or killed by a seal, right? Someone could look at that and say, look, his reaction, it was a split-second reaction. It was informed by nothing but feeling. But that's completely and utter nonsense, because that grandfather, the moment his granddaughter was born, or maybe even before that, engaged in this sort of rational calculus where he decided that this granddaughter was going to carry on his legacy. He decided that he loved her for a whole sort of logical reasons, how it makes him feel, so on and so forth, right? It was logical for him to love this person. It was in his interest to love this person because they're going to carry on his legacy. They're going to make him smile, whatever, right? All those reasons, logic, right? Still with me? He made this calculus way before that seal ever pulled her in the water, and he pre-programmed himself with this calculus so that when need be, he doesn't need to freeze in his tracks and be dumbfounded while his granddaughter is being drowned by a seal. He could just react in a matter of a split second because he's already made this calculus, rational, logical calculus. He's already made up his mind, and I don't mean putting lipstick on your forehead. And he could just access that little bit of information that he already pre-programmed himself with whenever need be in a matter of a split second, right? Why didn't all these other people jump in? Now, maybe they just weren't quick enough, right? Maybe they didn't notice, whatever. But why didn't all these other people jump in? Why? Is it perhaps it wasn't worth it for them to try even? Right? Maybe they didn't have this rational calculus pre-programmed in their minds, so it took them just a little bit longer to decide what to do. And since he was already in the water, they didn't do anything about it, right? They rationalized. They felt very similar feelings to what he felt, no doubt. All of us watching that video, we felt something. But they didn't jump in the water like he did they? And if her own father, let's say, I'm not sure if he was there or wasn't there, was standing there noticing it and he froze for just a split second, well, that's probably because he hasn't fully committed to his daughter's life like the grandpa did. Maybe because he still has a lot more of his own life left. I don't know. I'm just speculating. And let's say a stranger jumped in the water and saved her before any of the family members did. Wouldn't we see that as a more heroic act than one of the family members? I'm not saying it's not heroic for one of the family members to do this, but if a stranger does it, we automatically see that as a little bit more heroic, right? A little bit more valuable, right? Why? Well, because he had no reason to, right? or he had less reason to. It was less logical for him to risk his own life than it was for a family member, right? We recognize that our emotions are always informed by logic. Even mental illness, be it empathy or split personality disorder, has a logical cause, right? Poor diet, thus chemical imbalance. Maybe it's the microbes in your gut telling you to do things. And if you follow this revolutionary study of the human microbiome, you realize that we're not in full control, that our gut bacteria actually controls our brain, at least to a degree, right? So it's not crazy what I'm saying. This is science. So even if people do irrational, emotional things, there is still some kind of logical underpinning, right? Maybe that gut bacteria, for some odd reason that we don't yet understand, is making them do that because it's beneficial to that gut bacteria. Or that person is mentally ill and they just don't feel right unless they hurt other people, right? As in the case of a psychopath. A psychopath doesn't feel right unless they're hurting other people. So within that person's own logical framework, it's logical to hurt other people. It is. But within our broader societal framework, that's not logical, right? Because of the social contract, it's illogical to do that. But for that person specifically, that's logical. Even if it's malinformed, even if it's detrimental ultimately to that person's life because they're going to end up, on death row or whatever, that immediate gratification in that moment, that's a logical decision that person makes. So, see, this is the problem with vegans. They are at best irrational and at worst mentally ill. So how do we allow these people? Who are you to say that these are the people that should make our policy, right? Irrational and or mentally ill people. Those are the people that should be making our policy. I mean, I know our society is already mentally ill, but shouldn't we try to move in the other direction? And if feelings are number one, well, what about my feelings? Again, if your feelings dictate that the world shouldn't kill animals, what about the feelings of the 99% who feel that they should? What makes your feelings more credible? We have to resort back to logic because that's the only way we're going to convince people. And why is that? Because logic always informs our feelings, whether we recognize it or not. Because of ignorance or mental illness, this is a fact. Logic always informs our feelings. It could be pseudo-logic, could be flawed logic, it could be idiosyncratic logic that's illogical in a broader sense. It could be the logic of that gut bacteria controlling your actions, making you crave sugar when you know it's bad for you. So if feelings, at least in some context, are more important than logic, how is that true if they cannot exist without logic in the first place? How do you rectify that? I'd like to know. But let's just assume that feelings are supreme, at least in some cases, at least when it comes to veganism and saving, quote unquote, saving all these animals. All these vegans bragging about saving all these animals. Where are all these animals that you saved? Like I said, illogical, irrational, perhaps mentally ill. Hashtag not all. But let's just assume that feelings should rule supreme when it comes to animal agriculture and veganism. If the whole world goes vegan, what's going to happen? Well, genocide of all these animals, right? Because what are we going to do? You could talk about animal sanctuaries and all this other bullshit. Nobody believes that. We all know it's not going to happen. These animals are going to cease to exist, either because we eat them all or because we release them into the wild and they're going to get their ass kicked because they're ill-equipped to deal with diseases, other animals, even themselves. right? They're not going to make it. At least most of these breeds that we created are going to be genocided, right? They're going to cease to exist. Now, if veganism is about your feelings and animal feelings, how is killing sentient life or allowing it to wither away, meaning no more feelings? How can you sit there and say that feelings are so important to you when, because of your feelings will disappear? Didn't that ideology just refute itself? Now let's talk about the human genocide that will happen if you make lions eat grass. I'm not saying everybody's a lion. I'm not saying everybody is, but a lot of us are. And this is a proven fact. Look this up if you don't believe it. A lot of people that go on the vegan diet get very sick, and they can't sustain it because they literally reach the brink of death and turn around and destroy their health forever. There are thousands of these testimonials online. You can look them up. So we know for a fact that at least a significant portion of our population is going to suffer if you put them on a vegan diet. If you completely eliminate animal product foods, they're going to die. They're going to go sterile. They're not going to, women lose their period on the vegan diet all the time, right? I don't really want to go on a tangent, but all these vegan diets, they come out of religious cults that always look to curb sexuality, right? Temperance movements. So not only are a lot of people likely to die, they won't be able to procreate. And you're going to essentially create a genocide, if not of everybody, certain genetic lines. That's what's going to happen. You can't feed a wolf papayas and expect it to do very well. Definitely not produce viable offspring. So if feeling and sentience is so important to you, how is it that if we act, and you're saying that we should inform our actions based on your feelings, right? And because feelings are so important, how do you rectify this statement, this claim, with the fact that your feelings are going to lead to a lot of people non-existing, which will wipe out sentient life, which will wipe out feelings, lots of feelings, and then you're going to feel bad too? Didn't this ideology that's based on feelings just refute itself? This is why we have to be logical. This is why you can't have feelings without some kind of rational process. And we have to use true, pure, real, whatever you want to call it, logic, not just logic that doesn't take all factors into account, misinformed logic or pseudo logic, flawed logic. We need to use pure logic. To inform our feelings, and then we could use feelings to inform our decisions. At least when it comes to making social policy that's going to affect other people. It's completely naive to think that feelings exist outside of the universe of logic, that you could actually feel things without first having some sort of logical process going on in your brain or in the universe. It's completely naive to believe that that's not only that exists, but to think that malinformed feelings informed by a flawed logical process, that they're somehow credible in and of themselves. Because if you're just saying feelings and you're rejecting logic, you're not going to understand that your feelings are poorly informed by bad logic, flawed logic, no science, right? If you think that those two are separate, it's easy to, you completely remove that connection. So reason all of a sudden doesn't matter, or truth doesn't matter, right? You can't have feelings. Feelings do not exist in a vacuum. You can't have them without at least some kind of rationale. It doesn't happen. So that's first and foremost. But if we are going to base social policy and tell other people what to do because of fifis, let's not only recognize that they cannot exist without logic, let's make sure that that logic is sound. And then you can have your cake and eat it too, and I will agree with you. Then we can make the world a better place because of feelings. If we first realize what the underpinnings of feelings is, where feelings come from, and we differentiate between irrational feelings, i.e. mental illness, and feelings that are based in truth, fact, rationality, i.e. logic. I hope this makes sense, and if you think I went wrong somewhere in my analysis, please let me know in the comment section. There's no need to be a dickhead, but then again, there's really no need to be a vegan, and they seem to go hand in hand. So shout out to the person to whose video I addressed, because she definitely seems to buck that trend. Even though you're still a little bit naive. No disrespect. Thank you for listening. I am out.